Now, years ago, our publications often applied certain Bible accounts and certain Bible characters as types of something greater. But you've noticed that in recent years, that is seldom done. And the purpose of this talk is to explain why.
Even though this is a core component of every single Jehovah's Witness thought process about how they see the world,
the simple answer is we don't know. And we don't need to know because we're not the judges. It's above our pay grade.
I remember telling a friend of mine once where I wasn't treated too well in this particular branch territory, and I said to my friend, well, it's not me they need to worry about, it's my big brother. That's who they better worry about. Yeah, we got to pray for those men over there.
now I've disrespected Tony Morris. Does that mean that I am going to die at Armageddon? If you've been watching this channel for some time, you'll know that over the last 6 months or so, I've had this rapacious obsession with understanding the downfall of Watchtower. Now, as I've said for a long time, the downfall of Watchtower, in my opinion, is when Watchtower becomes something so unrecognizable that it has fundamentally changed, because it will be a very long time in the future before they actually close their doors. But I think the downfall could be surmised by how much they've changed, and do people even recognize it anymore? And as they've grown out their beards, they've stopped reporting time, they've appointed new governing body members, they've gotten rid of all of these changes that they make to cherished fundamental doctrines that they've been preaching for decades. I believe that we have already crossed that Rubicon and are now in the space where we can look at this in a historic context. We can look at all of those little nuanced details and figure out, how did we get here? What were all of these little changes? And as someone has had to be a Jehovah's Witness and sit there and live through this evolution, what is it going to be like for them in order to adapt into this new version of the Watchtower organization? Now, this thinking has absolutely haunted me. Trying to figure out exactly all of the little details has driven me nuts. Francis Bacon was correct when he talked about suspicion. I think he compared it to flying creatures. He said normal thoughts are like birds, but suspicion is like bats. It's always happened. They fly around at night. It drives honest husbands to jealousy. It drives kings into tyrants, and it drives happy people into states of melancholy. But he did say, I have never known, well, now I'm going to get the quote wrong. Something to the effect of, there's never been a remedy better for curing the suspicions in your mind as knowing a lot. If you are a suspicious person, it might just be because you don't have the requisite knowledge. So you should take upon the effort of trying to gain knowledge and not let those suspicions smother in your mind. And boy howdy, I hate when suspicions are smothering in my mind, and so I continue headlong in this journey of figuring out this downfall of Watchtower. And I think a very important aspect of the organization lies with their arrogance. It starts at the very tippity top of the organization with the governing body members, and it goes down into the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses. They have this incredible superiority complex that has been woven into their identity since the inception of Watchtower. Now, in order to explain this change, or what I think is a changing of what's happening, there's no better example that I think we could look at than the person who embodied that old school Watchtower arrogance, and look at his demise. Yes, we're going to do a case study in the arrogance of good old Tony Morris, because, man, you can be at the top of the mountain and fall flat on your butt in complete silence. He was rising like a phoenix when JW Broadcast came out, and he went out like a sad, wet fart. So, let's talk about it. Now, before we get to examining the character of Tony Morris, I want to at least elucidate a little bit further what I mean by this arrogance being a pivotal point of the indoctrination that people have in high control groups, because I suspect that a very important component of keeping people locked in a high control group is special knowledge. Whether this be some MLM where 5 secrets they don't want you to know to make $4,000 a month in passive income. Oh, what do they not want me to know? What is this special knowledge that us regular people aren't privy to, and how do I gain access to that? Now, Watchtower has a long and storied history of this behavior. They wanted to provide people with special knowledge. At the very inception, it was all about measuring the size of this burrito and the circumference of a taco shell, and you get to 1914, and that's how we know when Jesus was going to come on planet Earth and choose a Jehovah's Witness organization. And this carried straight on through into their more modern era, through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. They were constantly looking into the Bible and finding every little minuscule detail and attaching some significant meaning to that. If you look at the Revelation book, it is incredible how they're just masters of finding the significant in the ordinary. They're looking at all of the language of a grasshopper and some skeleton riding a beast and some emerald throne room and angels with the faces of animals, and they are attaching modern day meanings to all of these things. Now, this is a very important strategy for giving people that special feeling that you have the secret sauce. You know the Colonel's recipe. You are in on the secret. But this does create a secondary problem that is essentially inevitable. And that is, when you are engaged in this, you are opening the door for people to look at the leadership and saying, man, they are changing certain things and what we think about them. At one point, this grasshopper means the Britain, and then another time, now it means Russia. You know, what's really going on here? Maybe they don't know what they're talking about. Maybe I could use my Bible-trained conscience. Maybe I could pray for God's Holy Spirit, and I could do a little speculation. Maybe I can figure out the secrets of the universe here. And I think if you've ever been a Jehovah's Witness, you will know exactly who I'm talking about, because I suspect that at least one of these exists in every congregation, or had existed in every congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. The person that would look at the Bible and come up with their own hypotheses about the real meaning of certain things in scriptures. Now, these goofballs were a real fascinating thing in the Jehovah's Witness culture. If you've ever been a conductor of a Jehovah's Witness meeting, you know exactly the person I'm talking about. You're doing something that requires audience participation. So you ask a question and you get some people raise their hand and answer. And sometimes no one raises their hand except for Glenn Fitzpatrick. And you're sitting there sweating like, oh, Lord, I don't want to have to call on Glenn Fitzpatrick. He's going to say some wacky stuff. The guy he's never been married. He's sexually repressed. He's fueled by barley and McDonald's. Oh, man, but no one's raising their hand. So you call on Glenn Fitzpatrick, and he says some wacky stuff about some research project that he's done, and he's got the charts and everything, and he gets finished, and you're like, all right, thank you, Brother Fitzpatrick. And you move right along because it doesn't exist. You want to pretend like the whole thing never even happened. Now, the problem with this is, or the problem that I think could happen here is something that Theodore Roosevelt actually talked about. Sorry, need a little sidebar here. Called the lunatic fringe. And he basically proposed that any group of people is going to have this general ideology where they're fairly measured and nuanced in the way that they think about things and articulate those things. But on the fringes of any subset of people are going to be the lunatics. And they are the ones that are, because they're on the outside, the fringe, they're the first ones that get noticed. They are the ones that get all of the attention, even though they're on the very, very far spectrum of what that group of people, what their ideologies might be. They're going to garnish the most attention. Now, I would suspect that the Glenn Fitzpatricks of the Jehovah's Witness world are going to be the most likely ones to be writing letters to the governing body, calling the branch offices around the world, and sending emails to them, asking questions, sending in these long dissertations about how they've cracked some code in the Bible. And if you are unfamiliar with this concept of the lunatic fringe, you might trick yourself into thinking that these are the ones that represent the actual majority just because they are the loudest voices within any group. And so if you're the governing body, you might be looking at this as a problem because on one hand, you have a tool, a vital tool for keeping people in your religion, and that is this special knowledge. But then on the other hand, you have the people that are allowing themselves to speculate. Oh, Lord, the death of all thought is when people start speculating, thinking for themselves, thinking that they have the ability to come up with a narrative separate than the one that has already been prescribed to them. The death of a cult, of any control group, is when people start speculating. So, what do you do about this problem? You have a useful tool on one hand, but then on the other, this dangerous Glenn Fitzpatricks of the world that are not only the loudest voices that you're always having to hear about, but also the ones that are speculating. Well, here's how they handled it back in 2014 during an annual meeting.
Now, years ago, our publications often applied certain Bible accounts and certain Bible characters as types of something greater. But you've noticed that in recent years that is seldom done. And the purpose of this talk is to explain why. But here's the question. Who is to decide if a person or an event is a type if the Word of God doesn't say anything about it? Who is qualified to do that? Our answer? We can do no better than to quote our beloved brother Albert Schroeder, who said, "We need to exercise great care when applying accounts in the Hebrew Scriptures as prophetic patterns or types if these accounts are not applied in the Scriptures themselves."
Even though we're not going to confuse you with a lot of information about what we used to believe concerning this parable, we would like to say that what we're going to present now is a huge adjustment.
Well, they said, we tried our best to do this, but we are going to have to cave. The Glens are so loud, we can't stand it anymore. How about we just say that there's no such things as the types and archetypes, even though this is a core component of every single Jehovah's Witness thought process about how they see the world. I can remember during the attack of 9/11, the first thing my family did was whip out the Daniel's prophecy book. Yes, this is ingrained in Jehovah's Witnesses' perception of reality. How does a world event tie in to biblical prophecy? And that existed inside every Jehovah's Witness. And then, boom, they said, yeah, we're going to stop looking for these types and antitypes. And instead of that, we're going to just say,
The simple answer is, we don't know. And we don't need to know because we're not the judges. It's above our pay grade.
this, no doubt, is an earth-shattering transition that Jehovah's Witnesses have to make, because they go from a position of arrogance. They believed for all of these decades that they were special privy to God's knowledge. They were suckling at the tit of Jesus, and Jesus was giving them their milk and beans. He was supplying them with this rich spiritual food through the governing body, and it was giving them this special knowledge that no one else had, and it made them feel great. And it led to arrogance. If you are walking around the world thinking that you are one of like the 0.01% of the human population that actually understands where humanity is in the stream of time and how it relates to this grand purpose, you inherently are an extremely, annoyingly arrogant person. When I was a Jehovah's Witness, I was an annoyingly arrogant person because I thought I knew better than everyone else around me, and that the decisions I was making were somehow better because they were God approved, because I understood the special knowledge. And all of that was taken away in an instant. But it actually wasn't in an instant, because this transition in 2014, where they became public with it, coincides spectacularly well with the rise of popularity of the governing body. They became the faces of the organization because everything became about video production. Everything was all stylized on video now, and they wanted to become, what is the expression? The people that go on camera that are preachers. Did my brain just fall out of my butt? An online evangelist, an online warrior, a preacher of online things what is that called? Wow. Anyway, they wanted a televangelist. There it is, man. Fourth quarter, Steph Curry from the half court line downtown. Okay. They wanted to become televangelists. And when they did that, it really exposed something very interesting. And that was, instead of the entirety of Jehovah's Witnesses feeling like they could, do some of the speculation, maybe some people on the fringes, now they were centralizing it with a face behind it. There was a man that they could point to and look at and saying to them, we are changing the doctrine. We are allowed to do it. You are not allowed to do it. And if this person is just this wise old saint wizard that's in New York, okay, it's kind of hard, to have someone to be angry at because you don't really know who they are. Now, because of JW Broadcasting, you had a face of this changing doctrine, taking away this precious special knowledge that Jehovah's Witnesses have, and instead, now you just have the governing body telling you that, I know you've had this doctrine for a long time and that you've, grown up with, but you need to let that go. Enter Tony Morris.
Now, I thought I would just quote our new Kingdom book at this point, and Brother Splain helped us to understand. Sometimes we'll have cherished teachings. We've been saying it for decades, and we trust the brothers that printed it decades ago, and that's fine. But when it's time, then we need to adjust our thinking if the teaching's being adjusted. It's not complicated.
As he says there, it's not complicated. All you have to do is shut up and listen. Now, this is a very important thing, and I don't want to spend forever in a day going over every single article and breaking the whole thing down, but I'll just give you the TLDR on it. Previously, the Jehovah's Witnesses had believed that all anointed Christians, so they believe that only 144,000 people would be chosen to go to heaven, and that some set of those 144,000 would be alive on earth to assist Jesus with giving spiritual food, giving people information right up until Armageddon. And that was always considered to be anyone that was a part of that 144,000 group. Well, then they had a consolidation of power, and they changed this and said it's actually not everyone that's part of that 144,000, anyone claiming to be an anointed Christian. It's actually just the governing body, a group of 8 to 12 people that live in upstate New York City, mostly white guys, were now saying that they have the sole responsibility, collectively, but sole responsibility of feeding Jesus's sheep. So now you have this consolidation of power and saying, no, we are doing the feeding. So that's going to lead to even less speculation from those people on the lunatic fringe, because you would have people claiming to be of the anointed and therefore in a position to say, maybe I, because I am an anointed Christian, can interpret scripture. That's part of my commission. That's part of my duty to feed Jesus's sheep. Well, no, that is no longer the case because there was a consolidation of power. So you had to be a governing body member in order to participate in the feeding. And they tried to explain this even as being a biblical thing. I believe it was in the 2015 annual meeting, Tony Morris gave another talk reiterating this point.
So that we see the disciples of Jesus, the anointed ones, took from the mouth of Jesus, and they've passed it on to the great crowd. And Scripture foretold the perpetuation of divine teaching, and Jehovah's making it very clear, nothing will ever interfere with divine teaching being perpetuated. No matter what it may appear like, nothing will interfere. Now, it goes down generations, from the mouth of your children or from the mouth of your grandchildren, says Jehovah, from now on and forever. So divine teaching would be perpetuated in the mouth of Christ Jesus to his anointed footstep followers and then to the great crowd. And it continues to be presented. Well,
so you have a collective group of extremely arrogant people, Jehovah's Witnesses, because they think they have this special knowledge. And within that group, now the lunatic fringe essentially becomes the governing body, because they are the only ones that can dictate doctrine, that whatever they say goes, whatever changes they want to make. Remember what he said.
but when it's time, then we need to adjust our thinking if the teaching's being adjusted. It's not complicated. So,
it's not complicated. He was laughing at cherished beliefs people have had for decades. Do you think it's a super great idea to consolidate power and then laugh at people and say, hey, we're going to change it, and you just have to go along with it? Nervous laughter ensues. Now, I know I've just been speculating and yapping here for quite some time, but I want to play a clip of Tony Morris that lives rent-free in my mind. I was still a Jehovah's Witness when I first heard this, and it was a real ball scratcher. It was one of those moments that just made you itch a little bit and made you uncomfortable to hear. And I think it perfectly embodies the level of arrogance that this man achieved.
I remember telling a friend of mine once where I wasn't treated too well in this particular branch territory, and I said to my friend, well, it's not me they need to worry about, it's my big brother. That's who they better worry about. Yeah. We got to pray for those men over there.
someone wasn't very nice to Tony Morris. And what does he want to come out and do? Publicly shame them. They know obviously who they are. Who they must have had some bad interaction with someone somewhere, and they are very well aware that this interaction happened. And he's going to, he doesn't name them, but essentially publicly shame them and say, hey, it's not me you have to answer to, it's my big brother. Big brother Jesus is going to deal with your ass. And everyone starts laughing. Now whoever had this bad interaction with them, this could be a fairly terrifying thing if they don't wake up and say, what am I doing in this doomsday cult? But if you are a true believer, this would be a terrifying situation where you're thinking, wait, now I've disrespected Tony Morris. Does that mean that I am going to die at Armageddon despite giving my life to this organization? Well, let me actually play some of the clips building up to this moment in this talk, because it really highlights and demonstrates just how highly this man thinks about the way he's treated as being evidence of whether or not someone will survive Armageddon.
Just as Jehovah progressively revealed truths about the kingdom in the period leading up to 1914, he continues to do so during the time of the end. God's people have had to adjust their understanding on a number of occasions. Does that fact mean that they do not have Jehovah's backing? On the contrary, he supports them. Why? Because those who fear Jehovah have displayed two qualities that he loves: faith and humility.
So we have to go forward a little bit, but here in this talk, he's talking about changes made to the core doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses. And if these changes happen, he is claiming that, hey, that's not evidence that they got it wrong. That's just evidence that they are a humble person. It's baffling how backwards his thinking is, but once arrogance takes hold in your mind, something I often say, and that's I think these are the most scary, unhinged people on planet Earth, is people that start with a conclusion. When you start with, well, this is the answer, and then whatever happens, you just will you start making stuff up just in order to fit that conclusion that you've already reached, instead of following the evidence, as it were. So what would be evidence that God is using the humans on earth? Well, if their message was consistent and strictly stuck with what the Bible was in the Bible. And now you have them saying, hey, we used to say things that weren't in the Bible, which would be evidence against it. But he's saying, no, this is evidence for it. And not only that it's evidence for it, but actually this is really a demonstration of humility on the part of the governing body.
That humble attitude is reflected in the March 1st, 1925 issue of the Watchtower. And this is profound, back in 1925. Quote, "We know that the Lord is his own interpreter, that he will interpret his word to his people in his own good way and in his own due time." Jehovah's running this organization. He's the rider of the chariot, and we're pleased to follow the best we can and keep up with it.
So even though we've reached the pinnacle of the possible arrogance within the Jehovah's Witness cultural world sphere, they're calling it humility. God, I'm just a humble servant of God. God's in control of the organization. He always has been. I'm just his little puppet. That is a spectacular use of the word humility. I know it's common amongst Jehovah's Witnesses in general to say, oh, we're some of the most humble people on earth, even though there just aren't. This is what it looks like at its very worst. And he's going to go and talk about this illustration that Jesus gave of giving gold to certain slaves. So to one slave, he gave 10 bars of gold, another he gave 5, another 3, another 1. And each of these ones was able to double their efforts. And Jesus pronounced them good and faithful slave. You doubled my money. Good job. But there was one bad slave who just buried the gold bar in the ground because he was lazy. And he was like, hey, I didn't want to risk it. So here's your brick back. I didn't know what to do with it. And he, pronounced him a lazy slave. And the Jehovah's Witnesses historically had some complicated teachings about the meanings of all of these various different things, but they're changing those essentially now. So let's hear Tony Morris give some new explanation about what these mean that are a complete divergence from what they have historically taught.
Now, during the time after the apostles died, of course, we know Satan fomented the apostasy. And so, really, while the first century they had some activity there we can relate to, there are no sustained efforts during all those centuries where anybody was trying to fulfill the commission to preach and make disciples. You had little glimmers of things happening. So during that time, the weeds were just overrunning all of the wheat that was available. So then we come to the harvest time. In particular, we're talking about 1919, and the faithful anointed slaves on earth have been doing business during these last days. The anointed brothers, and I might add, anointed sisters, have done their best.
I just got to say, as part of the arrogance narrative here, he's saying that there is a great apostasy. And for years, decades, hundreds, centuries, no one, and I mean no one, was actually doing God's will until the Watchtower organization came along. So you had Jesus and the people that directly knew him, and once they died, it wasn't until the Watchtower Society that there were ever any true Christians. But no, this is supposed to be a humble organization. Riddle me that, but let's get back to this illustration that Jesus, the parable he gave of the gold talents, and listen to the language that Tony Morris chooses to use.
So, who has the 5 talents? And who represents those having the 2 talents? Thank you for not raising your hand. Those in the audience here, because there's no need to speculate about that. Okay? So stop it if you've been speculating. Oh, it's got to be the governing body. No, it doesn't say that. All that Jesus is trying to get across, they're going to do their best. Some get the workload of 5, others are doing 2. They doubled their efforts. That's all. That's all.
Even though the Watchtower organization apparently was speculating for decades, for its entire existence, about what these things would mean, even though Jehovah's Witness culture has been intrinsically tied to being tapped into the Bible to such an extent that a plane flies into the World Trade Center and my family's first reaction is to pick up the Bible and a Jehovah's Witness publication to see if there are any clues about the signs of the times. This is a fundamental thing that Jehovah's Witnesses do. And he says, do we know what these are? Good, you didn't say anything. And if you have, stop. Stop speculating. That, I think, was the big reason that they have made this change of the types and antitypes, is they can't stand the idea of people speculating. It's a dangerous thing if you're trying to influence people that are under your control. You have to vehemently tell them, don't speculate, it's a horrible thing. Because ideas are dangerous to doomsday cult leaders. They just are. If someone is walking around and an idea pops in their head, they do their best to squash that idea. Where'd you get that information? What are you even talking about? Can you prove any of that? They lose their mind if someone has the audacity to think for themselves. So he flat out tells them, hey, stop speculating. Here's the answer. It's in the Bible, whatever. Doesn't matter that we've said something different in the past, that we're the ones that have been speculating. You should stop. This is all part of that consolidation of power. And where does all of this lead?
Now, what role do those with an earthly hope play? Oh boy, very important role. Very important role. His illustration of the sheep and the goats teaches us that those with the earthly hope have the honor of loyally supporting Christ's brothers. I remember telling a friend of mine once where I wasn't treated too well in this particular branch territory, and I said to my friend, well, it's not me they need to worry about, it's my big brother. That's who they better worry about. Yeah. We got to pray for those men over there.
The warnings that watch out for my big brother. He's the one that you're going to have to answer to. There is a succession of power. And if you do not support the governing body in their efforts to preach the good news, if you're not nice to Tony Morris and you disagree with them or you butt heads a little bit, you might just have to be answering to Jesus when the end comes. This is the pinnacle of arrogance. And this wasn't a one-off situation where he said this. This was a characteristic of Tony Morris to have this very verbose, arrogant way of, putting his foot in the ground and said, nope, this is the way it is. Nope. That's just, you got to accept the way it is. In 2017, whenever they were making some changes to their meetings, he said this.
And some of you are Bible readers, scholars, if you will. But let's read it anyway in Ezekiel 33 and find what he faced. And we face this. It's a reality. So given the limited time, we have to make sure, and Jehovah's Spirit's moving us this way, that we accept this is the way it is.
Even when the organization was facing what would turn out to be a pretty important court decision from Norway, he said this about the situation.
The authorities in Norway have threatened to remove our legal registration because of our scriptural beliefs and practices regarding disfellowshipping. In the future, various governments will challenge our freedom of worship. They may pressure us to change our scriptural beliefs, but we're certainly not going to do that.
Now, for all of this arrogance, what did it lead to? What happened to Tony Morris? We don't know. This governing body member was yeeted. Just, he got the boot, the pink slip, and his retirement plan was to go to some hodunk town in North Carolina, never to be heard from again. No mention of his name. He used to fly around the world, first class, getting selfies and pictures, green handshakes, people just fawning over, oh man, it's a governing body member. He was literally seen as Christ's brother, a mouthpiece, self-proclaimed even, mouthpiece for God himself on earth. And he went from that to complete silence. Now, I just can't help but giggle at the juxtaposition of his arrogance versus how he went out and telling people that they shouldn't speculate, that they just need to accept that this is the way it is. Hey, God's running this organization and you have to accept it, because now everything got flipped on its head for him. God's organization said, this is the way it is. You have to go along with it. And I can't imagine that he would have gone out with a smile on his face saying, well, I guess if God's running this organization, it is what it is. I can't imagine he was super excited and happy about being removed instead of just being allowed to stay at Bethel, becoming an older honorary member of the governing body, even if he didn't really have any voting power. No gracious exit for him, just a blip on the website, and then the slow removal of a lot of his talks that he gave on jw.org. Even changing some of their publications, the printed publications, to remove even the shadow, the image of Tony Morris. They don't want anything to do. Imagine that. Your name, your face is blasted in books of Jehovah's Witnesses. You are part of their canon. And then you get erased, removed, whitewashed as if you didn't even exist. And you were the one telling people, it is the way it is. You have to accept it. This is God's organization. Just go with it. Shut up, stop speculating, and listen. And this, in my opinion, is a key component of the downfall of Watchtower. Because mentally, I think a very similar feeling that Tony Morris would have had with his whitewashing from the Jehovah's Witness publications, removing his videos. I feel like a part of Jehovah's Witnesses is lost when they're making all of these changes. These core beliefs, these cherished teachings are part of Jehovah's Witness. It's not just going to church on Sunday with them. It is a part of who they are. When a major event happens in the world, they go straight to the Jehovah's Witness publications. That is what they're trained to do. And as they're making these changes, as they're going through their doctrine and saying, yeah, we don't really know. We don't know. We don't know. No more special knowledge. Hey, up in the air, we don't really know. I feel like that is slowly erasing that identity that Jehovah's Witnesses have. That thing that makes them a Jehovah's Witness. That thing that makes them arrogant. Now, it's just gone and replaced by absolutely nothing. So I think this is a fascinating look into the Jehovah's Witness culture and mindset of arrogance, and how ultimately their arrogance has proved to be their own demise. So that's about all I got for you today. Stay safe, be kind, and don't forget to spend more time loving the things you love than hating the things you hate. And you better have a good-ass day.